He was about to cuff him. Then he saw the badge and realized he just made the biggest mistake of his career. The night air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and warm asphalt. The streetlights along Ashwood Drive flickered faintly, casting long, uneven shadows over the quiet road. In the driver's seat of his dark grey Dodge Charger, Isaiah Coleman exhaled a slow, measured breath. It had been another long shift. 12 hours of paperwork, meetings, and the usual bureaucratic headaches that came with his role. As Chief of Internal Affairs, he wasn't out on the streets chasing suspects anymore, but his work carried a different kind of weight. Tonight, though, his mind wasn't on work. He was just 3 blocks from home, thinking about the cold beer waiting in his fridge and the jazz playlist he'd queued up for the night. Then came the flashing red and blue lights. Isaiah glanced in the rearview mirror. Patrol car. No sirens, just lights. His grip on the steering wheel tightened for half a second before he forced himself to relax. This wasn't new. It had happened before, too many times. He had the look, the build, the skin that made people second-guess whether he belonged in certain neighborhoods, even though he owned a house right down the street. He slowed the car, signaled, and pulled onto the curb. Hands on the wheel, window down, interior lights on. Standard procedure. A tall, broad-shouldered officer stepped out of the patrol car, his silhouette stark against the glow of the headlights. Officer Bradley Carter. Mid-30s, square jaw, clean cut. The type who looked like he spent more time in the gym than reading policy manuals. Isaiah didn't recognize him, but judging by his posture, the squared shoulders, the hand already hovering near his holster, Carter had already decided how this encounter was going to go. The officer approached the window, scanning the car's interior like he expected to find something illegal. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation, just straight to demands. Isaiah kept his hands visible. "Can I ask why I'm being stopped?" His voice was calm, measured. Carter's eyes narrowed. "License and registration. Now." Isaiah didn't move. He could feel it, that shift in the air. That moment where patience and protocol started to bend under the weight of ego. "Sir," Isaiah tried again, his voice steady. "I'll give you my information, but I'd like to know why you pulled me over first." Carter's jaw flexed. He didn't like that. "You're in an area that's had a string of car break-ins, and you don't look familiar." There it was. Isaiah glanced at the house just 3 doors down, the one he'd lived in for almost 8 years. He knew every neighbor on this street. He had mowed their lawns, attended their barbecues, waved to them on his morning jogs. But to this cop, he was just another unknown black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Carter took a step closer, resting a hand on the car door. "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Isaiah inhaled through his nose. He had a choice. He could comply, let the man have his moment of power, and de-escalate the situation. Or he could push back. He glanced down at his badge, tucked neatly inside his wallet. Not yet. "Officer, with all due respect, I live 3 houses down. My ID will show that." Carter scoffed, shaking his head like he had just heard the oldest excuse in the book. "You live here, huh?" He leaned down, eyes locked on Isaiah's. "Then you won't mind stepping out, just so we can clear this up." Isaiah clenched his jaw. He knew this game. He had investigated hundreds of cases like this. Stops that started just like this one, where the officer kept pushing, prodding, escalating until the suspect slipped up, got nervous, made the wrong move. And when that happened, resisting, non-compliance, failed to follow lawful orders. It was the same script, every time. Isaiah exhaled. Then slowly, he unbuckled his seatbelt. "All right," he said, voice even. "I'm getting out." He moved with careful precision, hands visible, slow movements, no sudden jerks. He knew that at this moment, he wasn't Isaiah Coleman, Chief of Internal Affairs. He was just another black man under the scrutiny of a cop who had already made up his mind. The second his feet touched the pavement, Carter took a step back, one hand still hovering near his weapon. Isaiah stood still, hands relaxed, expression neutral. He knew better than to give this officer anything to justify what he clearly wanted to do. Carter circled him like he was inspecting something suspicious, scanning his jeans, his t-shirt, even his shoes. "Where were you coming from?" "Work." "And where's that?" Isaiah tilted his head slightly, watching the officer. "Downtown." Carter let out a humorless chuckle. Real specific. Isaiah felt his pulse in his ears. The jazz playlist in his head had been replaced by something sharper, louder. He knew how these stops ended when there were no cameras. Then, Carter reached for his belt, not his gun, not his radio, his cuffs. Isaiah exhaled sharply through his nose. He'd given this man every opportunity to act right, to treat him like a citizen instead of a suspect. "Enough!" Isaiah's voice dropped to a level that made people listen. Controlled, measured, final. "You might want to check my badge before you do something you'll regret." Carter froze. A beat of silence, then a smirk. "Yeah?" Carter scoffed. "What are you, a lawyer?" Isaiah held his gaze. Then, slowly, he reached into his back pocket. No rush. No sudden moves. He wasn't about to give this cop a reason. He pulled out his wallet, flipped it open, and held it up to the streetlight. The gold badge gleamed in the glow. Chief, Internal Affairs. Carter's smirk vanished. His lips parted slightly. A half-breath caught in his throat. His eyes flicked between the badge and Isaiah's face, like his brain was short-circuiting. And Isaiah just stood there, watching him process the mistake of his career. But Carter had no idea. It was about to get worse. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The night air felt thicker now, charged with something Carter wasn't ready to face. He stared at the badge like it might disappear if he blinked too hard. It didn't. Isaiah saw it all, the flicker of panic, the quick calculation happening behind Carter's eyes. The officer had made a mistake. And now, he was scrambling to figure out how to undo it. But there was no undoing this. Carter cleared his throat, straightened his shoulders. Isaiah waited. The younger officer clenched his jaw, trying to regain control. "Look, I was just following protocol. We've had reports of suspicious activity." Isaiah's eyebrow lifted. "Suspicious activity?" Carter nodded quickly, latching onto the excuse like a lifeline. "Yeah, couple break-ins in the area. I saw your vehicle and—" Isaiah let out a slow breath through his nose. "And—" Carter hesitated. "Say it. Say what you really mean." Isaiah watched the battle happening in Carter's head, pride fighting against the weight of reality. "I didn't recognize you," Carter finally muttered. Isaiah nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Didn't recognize me." His voice was even, controlled. "And that was enough to pull me over, to order me out of my car, to reach for your cuffs?" Carter flinched. Isaiah didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't give the younger officer any room to twist the situation. He just stared. And Carter? He couldn't hold the eye contact. His gaze flicked to the badge again, then to the patrol car, as if silently praying for backup. But he was alone in this. "You know what I do, right?" Isaiah's voice was quieter now, but somehow heavier. Carter swallowed. Yeah, I know." Isaiah tilted his head. "Say it." The younger officer hesitated, then forced the words out. "Internal Affairs." "Chief of Internal Affairs," Isaiah corrected, "which means it's literally my job to investigate stops like this. Officers like you." Carter's fingers flexed at his sides, his face flickering between anger and panic. He wasn't used to being challenged. Not like this. Isaiah could see the wheels turning. The younger cop was desperate to regain control of the situation, to turn it around. But Isaiah wasn't letting him. Not tonight. Carter exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders back. "Look, I wasn't trying to—" Isaiah cut him off. "Let's be real, Officer Carter. If I were anyone else, if I didn't have this badge, how would this have ended?" Carter said nothing. And that silence said everything. Isaiah let the moment stretch, forcing Carter to sit with it. But then, Carter's face hardened. Isaiah saw it immediately, the moment where shame turned into defensiveness. The younger officer squared his shoulders, his voice sharpening. "I was just doing my job." Isaiah huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Your job?" Carter nodded stiffly. "Yeah. We've had crime in the area. I saw a car I didn't recognize and I followed protocol." Isaiah's jaw tightened. He'd seen this script before. It was the last-ditch excuse, the moment an officer realized he was wrong but couldn't bring himself to admit it. Carter continued, words coming faster now, like he was convincing himself. "You didn't identify yourself. You didn't immediately provide your license and registration. That's suspicious behavior." Isaiah blinked slowly. Unbelievable. "You asked for my ID, and I asked why I was being pulled over," Isaiah said. "That's standard procedure. That's my right." Carter shrugged, shifting on his feet. "Maybe. But this whole thing could have been avoided if you had just complied." Isaiah went still. Complied. Complied. There it was. That word. That belief. That same rotten foundation so many stops like this were built on. Isaiah inhaled slowly, keeping himself steady. Then he stepped forward. Carter's body tensed. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. The same instinct that made him reach for his cuffs in the first place. Isaiah noticed. He noticed everything. He leaned in just slightly, voice dropping to something low and sharp. "So, let's get this straight," Isaiah said. "You pulled me over for looking out of place. You ordered me out of my car because I asked a question. You searched me because you didn't like how I responded. And now you're standing here telling me this is my fault because I didn't immediately roll over for you." Carter flushed red. For a second he looked like he might argue. Then his mouth snapped shut. Isaiah let the silence stretch. He could see it. Carter was unraveling. But Isaiah wasn't done. Not yet. "You want to talk about compliance?" Isaiah continued, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Tell me something, Officer Carter. What happens when you don't comply?" Carter frowned. "What?" Isaiah tilted his head slightly. "If I had given you an unlawful order, and you refused to comply, what would happen to you?" Carter hesitated. "Would you be detained?" Isaiah asked. "Handcuffed? Arrested?" Carter's lips pressed into a thin line. Isaiah held his gaze, voice soft but unrelenting. "Or would you be given the benefit of the doubt?" Silence. Carter's jaw locked. He had no answer. Isaiah nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." But Carter wasn't the only one feeling the weight of this moment. Isaiah had been in this exact position before. Too many times. The only difference? Tonight he had a badge that outranked Carter's. But what about tomorrow? What about the next guy who didn't have the title, the leverage, the shield of authority? Isaiah had spent his whole career investigating cops like Carter, writing reports, filing complaints. But reports didn't change mindsets. Carter wouldn't walk away from this thinking about policy violations. But maybe, just maybe, he'd think about this conversation. Isaiah sighed through his nose, rubbing a hand over his face. The exhaustion from his shift was creeping back in. But this moment, this drained him more than the entire day combined. He looked back at Carter, who still hadn't moved. And Isaiah knew this wasn't over. Not yet. But the next move. That was his to make. For the first time since the stop began, Officer Carter looked uncertain. Isaiah could see it in the way the younger cop's hands flexed at his sides, the way his jaw tensed like he was biting back words he couldn't afford to say. This wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. This was about control. And right now, Carter had lost it. But Isaiah knew better than to let his guard down. He'd seen too many officers double down when they realized they had messed up. Pride was a dangerous thing, and for some it was easier to justify bad behavior than admit to it. Carter exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Look, man, I didn't mean—" Isaiah's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Don't look, man, me. You don't get to soften your tone now. Not after you reached for your cuffs." Carter's eyes flicked down for half a second, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He knew there was no walking this back. Not with words. So he tried something else. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is," he muttered, shifting his weight like he was itching to move. Isaiah felt his pulse in his temples. A bigger deal. He thought about the names he had read in case files, names that only lived in reports now, names of people who never got the chance to argue back. And this cop had the nerve to call it not a big deal. Isaiah stepped forward, closing the space between them. Carter stiffened, but he didn't move back. "You tell me something," Isaiah said, his voice controlled but sharp. "What's the difference between me and the last guy you stopped like this?" Carter blinked. "What?" Isaiah gestured to himself. "Me. Right now. Standing here. What's the only thing that kept this stop from going south?" Carter knew the answer. That much was obvious, but he didn't want to say it. Isaiah waited. Carter's throat bobbed, his mouth opening slightly before he caught himself. Isaiah tilted his head, pressing. "Is it my car, my clothes, the way I speak? What is it?" Carter's eyes darted to the badge in Isaiah's hand. And there it was. Isaiah nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Carter's lips parted slightly, like he wanted to argue. But what could he say? The proof was standing right in front of him. Isaiah sighed through his nose. "I need you to understand something, Officer Carter," he said, voice low but firm. "That badge saved me tonight. Not my actions, not my rights, not the fact that I live on this street. The badge. That's it." Carter's mouth pressed into a thin line. He knew it was true. He just wasn't ready to admit it. Isaiah let the weight of the moment sink in. Then, finally, he pulled his wallet back and slid his badge inside. The movement made Carter flinch. Isaiah caught it immediately, the way Carter's fingers twitched like they might reach for his belt again. Even now, even after everything, Carter's instinct was to react. Isaiah clenched his teeth. That was the real problem, wasn't it? It wasn't just this stop. It was the instinct, the muscle memory. For Carter, and too many others like him, men like Isaiah weren't just people. They were threats first, humans second. And that was lethal. Isaiah took a step back, inhaling deeply, trying to decide what came next. He could let this slide, could let Carter walk away without consequences, let him convince himself that this was just a misunderstanding. But Isaiah didn't believe in misunderstandings, not when it came to patterns of behavior. And Carter, this wasn't his first time. Isaiah had seen his name before, written in complaints, buried in reports that never went anywhere. He just hadn't connected the face to the name until now. Now he had the chance to make sure this stopped here. Isaiah squared his shoulders. Give me your badge number." Carter's breath hitched. "What?" Isaiah didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. The younger officer hesitated. Then, for the first time tonight, his expression flickered into something close to fear. Because now it was real. The stop, the profiling, the escalation. It was all going on record. Carter swallowed hard. "Come on, man. You don't have to do that." Isaiah gave a humorless chuckle. "No. You sure about that?" Carter was quiet. Isaiah didn't blink, didn't break eye contact, didn't let him breathe. "Badge number." "Now." Carter exhaled sharply, shifting his weight. "Look, I made a mistake, all right? I get it. I do." Isaiah's stare was unrelenting. "Badge number." Carter sighed, eyes flicking toward his patrol car. Then, reluctantly, he mumbled the numbers under his breath. Isaiah pulled out his phone, typed them in, saved them, committed them to memory. Carter's Adam's apple bobbed. He was pissed now, but not at himself. He was pissed that he had to answer for it. Isaiah slid his phone back into his pocket. "We'll be having a conversation at headquarters." Carter's jaw tightened. That hit him where it hurt. Isaiah didn't wait for a response, didn't give Carter the chance to make it worse. He stepped toward his car, opened the door, and slid inside. The engine hummed to life, headlights cutting through the night. Carter stood there, stiff, silent, unsure of what to do now that the power had shifted. Isaiah put the car in drive, but before he pulled away, he rolled the window down one last time. And when he spoke, his voice was steady, certain, final. "You were right about one thing, Officer Carter." Carter's eyes flicked toward him, still burning with frustration. Isaiah exhaled slowly. "You really didn't recognize me." Then he pulled off, leaving Carter standing there, alone, exposed, and face to face with a truth he could no longer ignore. But for Carter, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Officer Bradley Carter stood there, unmoving, as the red glow of Isaiah's taillights disappeared into the night. His jaw clenched so tight it ached. His pulse hammered against his temples. His hands twitched, part frustration, part something else, something heavier. For the first time in his career, he wasn't in control. The power he always had in situations like these? Gone. Just gone. And the worst part? He knew he was in the wrong. Carter turned toward his patrol car, yanking open the door with a little too much force. He slid into the driver's seat, but he didn't start the engine. Instead, he sat there, staring at his own hands on the wheel. They weren't shaking. But they weren't steady either. He had spent years convincing himself that he was a good cop, that all the complaints, all the warnings, none of that applied to him. People didn't like getting pulled over. People didn't like getting questioned. People didn't like authority. That's what he had told himself. But tonight he had nothing to hide behind. Because this time, the man he had profiled wasn't just some random guy. He was the chief of internal affairs. And Carter had walked straight into a fire he couldn't put out. He let out a slow breath, pressing his palms into his eyes. There was a moment back there, a moment he kept replaying over and over like a bad loop in his head. The second Isaiah had stepped forward, looked him in the eye. If I didn't have this badge, how would this have ended? Carter had no answer. That's what was messing with him the most. Because deep down he knew the answer, and it made him sick. He would have cuffed him, maybe worse. And the worst part, he wouldn't have thought twice about it. Carter inhaled sharply and gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He had spent years believing he was different, that he wasn't like the ones who made the news. But was he? He squeezed his eyes shut. This wasn't just about Isaiah Coleman. This wasn't about one bad stop, one bad judgment call. It was about all the others, all the faces, all the names, all the times he had done this and walked away without a second thought. But tonight, he couldn't walk away. Because now, it was real. Now, it had a face, a name, a consequence. Carter exhaled sharply and finally turned the key in the ignition. The patrol car rumbled to life, but it didn't feel the same. His uniform felt tighter. His badge felt heavier. And for the first time, he wondered if he was ever going to be able to wear it the same way again. But this wasn't over. He knew that. Tomorrow, he would walk into the precinct and face the man who now had the power to end his career. Isaiah Coleman was waiting. And Carter had no idea how he was going to talk his way out of this one. The next morning, the precinct was quieter than usual. Or maybe that was just in Carter's head. He sat at his desk trying to focus on the paperwork in front of him, but the words blurred together. He had barely slept. His mind had been a constant loop of the night before. The flashing lights, the weight of the cuffs on his belt, the gleam of that badge. Chief of Internal Affairs. He had screwed up. And now, Isaiah Coleman was somewhere in this building, deciding his fate. Carter exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. He had been here before, called in for complaints, for questionable stops, for things that never went anywhere. But this time was different. A shadow passed his desk, and he looked up just in time to see Lieutenant Avery standing in the doorway of the captain's office. Her gaze landed on him, expression unreadable. "Carter, Coleman wants to see you, now." His stomach tightened. There it was, no way out now. He stood, forcing his legs to stay steady, and followed her down the hall. Every step felt too loud. Every set of eyes on him felt too sharp. Then, they reached the office. And there he was, Isaiah Coleman, sitting behind the desk, hands folded, watching Carter with that same unreadable expression. But there was something in his eyes. Something Carter couldn't place. "Close the door," Isaiah said. Carter did. Then silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Isaiah leaned back in his chair, tapping a single finger against the desk. Then, finally, he broke the silence. "You know why you're here?" It wasn't a question. Carter swallowed. "Yes, sir." Isaiah studied him. "And?" Carter's jaw tightened. His pride fought against the words, the instinct to justify, to explain, to make it sound better than it was. But there was nothing to explain. So finally he forced the words out. "I was wrong." Isaiah's head tilted slightly. "Wrong about what?" Carter's throat felt tight. "I profiled you," he admitted. "I escalated the stop when I shouldn't have. He exhaled sharply. "I let my own bias decide how that stop was going to go before I even knew who you were." Isaiah didn't move, didn't react, just watched him. Then he spoke, his voice steady. "You've had 6 complaints against you in the last 3 years." Carter's chest tightened. "I know." Isaiah's fingers tapped against the desk. "And every single one of them was dismissed." Carter said nothing. Isaiah leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Officer Carter, do you think that's because you were always in the right? Or because the people filing those complaints didn't have a badge to back them up?" Carter clenched his jaw, but this time he didn't argue, because he knew. They both knew. Isaiah studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, he let out a slow breath and leaned back again. Do you know why you're still in this room, Carter? The younger officer's eyebrows pulled together slightly. Isaiah nodded toward the badge pinned to his chest. Because I want to believe you can change. Carter's breath caught. I've seen cops like you before, Isaiah continued. And I've seen two kinds of outcomes. He held up one finger. The ones who double down, who get defensive, who refuse to see the problem. Then a second finger. And the ones who wake up. The room felt too small. Carter's skin felt too hot. I don't know which one you are yet, Isaiah said, but I'm giving you one shot to figure it out. Carter stared at him. What? What does that mean? Isaiah's eyes sharpened. It means you're going through retraining. It means you're going to sit in a room and listen to the people who have filed complaints against this department. It means you're going to understand exactly why what you did last night was dangerous. Carter exhaled slowly. Or, Isaiah's gaze hardened. Or you can turn in your badge right now. Carter's stomach dropped. Isaiah's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. This is your choice, Isaiah said. You can learn from this, or you can leave. But what you're not going to do is keep that badge and keep making the same mistakes. Carter's fingers twitched. He had never been given an ultimatum like this. He could walk out right now, find another department, a fresh start. Or he could stay and face everything he had been running from. The weight of it settled over him, and for the first time he wasn't sure if he had what it took to carry it. But there was one thing he did know. He had a decision to make, and there was no escaping it now. The office felt too quiet. Carter stared at Isaiah, his mind racing. His heartbeat was a dull thud in his ears. This wasn't just about last night anymore. This was about everything, every stop, every interaction. Every moment he had convinced himself that he was doing his job, that it wasn't about race or power or control. But now, that excuse felt hollow. He could walk out, turn in his badge. Maybe another department would take him. Maybe he could start over somewhere new. But the truth? That wouldn't change anything. Because the problem wasn't the badge. It was him. Isaiah was still watching him, arms crossed, waiting. And Carter realized something in that moment. This wasn't about punishment. This was a test. Isaiah wasn't just trying to see if Carter could admit he was wrong. He was trying to see if he could do something about it. Carter's fingers twitched at his sides. The words tasted like sand in his mouth, but he forced them out. I'll do the training. Isaiah didn't react at first. He just studied Carter like he was searching for a crack in his resolve. Then he nodded once. Good. A breath Carter didn't realize he was holding rushed out of his chest. Isaiah leaned forward slightly. But let's be clear about something. Carter stiffened. This isn't just about sitting through a couple of sensitivity workshops and calling it a day. Carter said nothing. You're going to hear things that make you uncomfortable. You're going to see the other side of this badge, the side you've ignored for too long. Isaiah's voice lowered, sharper now. And you're not just going to sit there. You're going to listen. You're going to learn. And when it's over. He leaned back again, voice steady. You're going to prove to me that this means something to you. Carter swallowed. How? Isaiah's eyes didn't waver. You'll figure it out. The weight of that hit Carter harder than he expected. Isaiah wasn't going to hold his hand. He wasn't going to tell him what to do. Because real change? That had to come from him. Isaiah glanced at the clock. Your first session is tomorrow. Be there on time. Carter nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. Isaiah's gaze lingered on him for a second longer. Then, with a final nod, he dismissed him. Carter turned toward the door, gripping the handle. But before he stepped out, he hesitated. Slowly, he turned back. "I know I can't undo last night," he said, "and I don't expect you to believe I've changed just because I say I will." Isaiah didn't respond. Carter swallowed hard. "But I'm going to try." For the first time, something flickered in Isaiah's eyes. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it wasn't doubt either. Carter nodded once, then stepped out into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him. And for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. A week passed. Then a month. Carter sat through every session. He listened. He learned. He forced himself to hear every story, every name, every reality he had ignored before. He stayed quiet. Not because he had nothing to say, but because for the first time he realized he didn't know enough to speak. It wasn't easy. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to push back against the ugly truth of it all. But then he thought about Isaiah, and the way he had stood there that night, calm, controlled, but completely and undeniably in charge. Carter wanted to be that kind of cop, not the kind who needed a badge and a gun to feel powerful, but the kind who understood what real power was. One evening, as the sun set over the precinct parking lot, Carter saw Isaiah walking toward his car. For a second, he considered just letting him go. But then, against every instinct in his body, he called out, "Chief Coleman." Isaiah turned. Carter swallowed. He shifted on his feet. "I wanted to say thanks." Isaiah studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow nod, he replied, "We'll see if you mean it." Then he got in his car and drove off. Carter stood there, watching the taillights disappear into the night. And for the first time he realized, this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Every day people are forced to prove their innocence before they're even given a chance to speak. Some don't get that chance at all. Change starts with awareness, but real change, that starts with action. If you see something wrong, speak up. Hold people accountable, be part of the solution. Because silence is just another kind of compliance.